Hello, everybody at home. I'm Nicole, the manager at Read It Again Bookstore. Thanks for tuning in to our weekly poetry series. I'm joined tonight by Susana Case below me and Lynn McGee. The way the formatting is going to work tonight, each poet will read for 15 minutes, followed by a discussion on craft. Viewers, feel free to make comments or ask questions throughout, and we'll respond to them at the end of the readings. Susana is going to read first, so I'll introduce her. Susana Case is the author of 7 books of poetry, most recently Dead Shark on the In Train, published in 2020 from Broadstone Books. Drugstore Blue won an Ippy Award in 2019. She is also the author of 5 chapbooks, 2 of which won poetry prizes. Her first collection, The Scottish Cafe, was re-released in a dual-language English-Polish version by Apollo University Press. Poems by Case have appeared in Calyx, Catamaran, the Portland Review, Potomac Review, Rattle, Rhino, and many other journals. Case is a professor and program coordinator at the New York Institute of Technology in New York City. All right, Susana, take it away.
Thank you, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be in Georgia while I'm in my apartment in New York City. And I'm going to be reading tonight from the book that's on the screen, Dead Shark on the N Train. This is a book in 3 parts, and I'm going to read some poems from each part, starting with the first one, which is called Living Dolls, and which looks at the way in which women and young girls have often been objectified, made objects of. And I'm going to start with a poem about junior high school in New York. The junior high schools usually have numbers, as does this one. And the title is JHS, Junior High School 190. Every white girl deep into doo-wop or rock envies Gilda, who gets to dance with the black guys at Friday school parties because we say she's had ballet. While we're all watching Gilda shimmy, her blonde hair loosening from its dancer's knot, the girl from France is on the roof, working up the will to jump. She's pregnant, too many weeks, her belly thickening. How could she not have known, we whisper, as if we know something. A policeman brings her down, red-eyed, red lights flashing, down the block, past the crowd, past the red brick junior high windows barred like a house of detention. She never returns. Our bodies are bribes, the need, carried in our book bags to get the best boys. What we know is we want to be royalty. We want everything we touch turning to gold. So let's skip ahead to adulthood. This is a poem about breasts. It originally appeared in an anthology about bras and breasts and then ended up in the book, and it's called Radiance. From its lacy constriction, a breast emerges. My breast. I'm a lousy physicist. How does the halo around a nipple shift every law of thermodynamics I thought I knew? Flow, energy, every year, every century, every millennium. I want to name your mouth upon my breast, a topography lesson. I'm a better geographer. Skin, nipple, areola, forget about the rest, glands and adipose. Always it's desire, the brushing of surface that makes heat possible. Pleasure, a million tears. Lie with me, lie to me until your tongue burns. I don't know how many people realize it, but Marilyn Monroe, who I've written a number of poems about, one of which appears in this book, wrote poetry, although none of it was published in her lifetime. And this is called The Unpublished Poems of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn in a striped swimsuit reading Ulysses, photographed by Eve Arnold, 1955. She wanted blondes to be thought sexy and astute. She wanted herself to be thought astute. Blonde, pejorative, 19th century, as in dizzy blonde, as in a blonde moment, as in risque British burlesque performer, as in French courtesan Rosalie Duthay. Marilyn left fragments of handwritten texts, crossed out words, inserted phrases, her memories, dreams, fears, enjammed. The public knew only the lines of her Cupid's bow, but no silly woman would stand by Arthur Miller as he refused to name communists. Marilyn, surrounded by 430 books with penciled notes, writes to herself, "Ah, life, they have cheated you." There's a number of poems in this book about violence, and the victims are often women, and this one is called Walking Home. The girl walking home alone doesn't know what to do about the stranger who calls her name. He claims he has a gun. His knowing her name is a gun. He blocks her way. Rail track, chain link fence, no parking sign. It's like that test she had in school yesterday, having to choose which animal doesn't belong. She guessed it was the cow. This girl knows nothing of farms. On her left, the empty tennis club. In front, the man who snarls he will kill her. Let me see the gun, in her piccolo voice. A train rushes by. If she were on it, her life would be different. The world is full of noise, weeds, cigarette butts, rusted car, locked shed. She runs. She doesn't know if he can keep up. He's too old to catch her. He screams again, "I'll kill you." She doesn't look back. It hardly seems to belong to you or me. At a restaurant on Mahoning, supposed to be Chinese, except for the white waitress refilling our water glasses, white bread on the table, an iffy special with white sauce, I tell you about a crime terrible in its ordinariness, a quarrel over money. He knifed her 9 times. It happened somewhere else, but seems more likely here. Maybe every town's the same that way. The story's such an old one. Specifics don't matter. Maybe you don't need to listen. Maybe I just need to talk, to tell you she made the papers back in New York. Snow falls outside, white slush filling up spaces not yet filled by words, dribbling the window, its leaky seals. Menominee Indians believe the universe started with a drop of water. Every killing, every poem, every storm. Truth seems ancient, surrounded by moisture, a whole history of the world wrapped in one wet whitened narrative, not about who found her, the way her sister's face looked. So the middle section of this book is based on the crime scene models of a woman named Frances Glessner Lee and her life. She lived in the early part of the 20th century and made dollhouses, basically, dioramas, like many women of her class and time. But in these dioramas, there were always dead bodies. And Harvard, eventually they ended up in Harvard, which still owns them. She made 20 of them. One is lost. And there are prose poems in this central part about her life, and then regularly lineated poems based on the crime models. So here's one about her life. Frequenting autopsies to verify the accuracy of her models, Glessner Lee notes the correct amount of bloating among those in her down-at-heel homes and rooms, victims led astray by desire and vice. The inherent vice of materials, degradation over time. Nail polish depicting blood turns purple. She paints dolls, newspapers stuffed into cracks, and crushed cigarettes, knits stockings with needles the size of straight pins. 3 crime scenes a year, each as costly as a basic house, not like her house, genteel, full of antiques, or the one in Santa Barbara to which she sent after her divorce. 8 years is enough to wallow in disgrace. She feels freed instead. Obsessed, she writes, "This has been a lonely and rather terrifying life I have lived." And this is an example of one of the poems inspired by the dollhouses or dioramas, Body in the Closet. Her neck is slashed. She's sprawled on the closet floor, knife at hand. Is this what she worked so hard for, on her back and knees? Female sexuality begets violence. The hooker always gets it in the end. The landlord finds her body, calls the police. They call on her last client, a man who went to her red wallpapered room. Cigarettes smoked, whiskeys poured. She was dolled up in red lipstick and nail polish, all her gold bangles. Her hot date claims she grabbed a jackknife he used to open a package and dashed into the closet. It's all he knows. The John scurried off after he opened the closet door. He's got nothing to add about an argument, nothing about the hurry, hurry, hurry at the scene, the suitcase, clothes, red coat, all the frantically opened dresser drawers. So the third section of the book returns to poems that are personal, but also based on incidents in the world. And this is one that was inspired by the tsunami in Japan several years ago, and it's called The Space Between Missing and Dead. He dives deep to where the ocean sounds like burning hair, to the trench where he finds soda cans, tires, sneakers. To feed her, he leaves rice balls stuffed with sour plums. Because it snowed the day the tsunami gathered up people, traffic lights, trees, shrouded even houses in its freezing water, he looks for black pants, a red coat, just in case. They take longer to decompose. At the thought she'd become soft, he shakes his head no, misses the woman who, when music played, swayed close to him in moonlight. He likes to imagine she breathes underwater, will know to swim to where the rice floats. So this is a poem I wrote after a friend from childhood died, and it's called Death Has Come In, with a line from Eliot. Angus Barbieri, Scotsman, holds the Guinness World Record for the longest liquid fast, lasted over a year before eating a boiled egg and a slice of buttered toast. 3 people fit into his old pants. Angus went on to live a happy life. Wife, kids, kept off the weight. You are not going to have that egg. Cancer 2.0 has launched 3 weeks with only lemon ices and ice chips, your lump the size of a grapefruit next to your colostomy bag from the last bout. The doctors have nothing more. Even the television you love so much has spent its capacity to distract. Last time you were in hospital, we argued about politics. Kavanaugh on the screen. I yelled a lot about gender and stalked out. I am not a nice person. I sit here thinking mostly of myself, my relief, the big C got you and not me. In the room, the women come and go. They jot on charts, no one talking of Michelangelo or time, except when the religious guy comes around. Burial plans, where, which dress, a sundress, a wig. How can I, a person full of words, not know what to say? You are always my best friend, you tell me, and try to smile. The truth is, we have not been close since high school. I want to touch you, but do not want to touch you. I am not a nice person. I cry, not out of empathy, repelled and scared. Your covers are pushed down and too much of you shows, and I don't say anything, and yet I put that shriveled flesh in this poem. The winter winds blow outside, the air is stifling. I pull off my scarf, my sweater, heap knits on a chair. I roll up and fold, unfold, and roll out my hospital pass. So I'm going to end with the title poem, Dead Shark on the End Train. Poor brown fish beached at Coney Island, then carried in someone's arms to the roller coaster, where another man thought it beautiful and tried to transport it home, only to abandon it on the subway. And you know how it is in New York City. Nothing surprises anyone. The car reeked of dead shark, and passengers took photos, debating Instagram filters, when the conductor asked everyone to leave and closed off that train. At the end of the line in Queens, a transit worker plastic bagged the body and normalized the car. I fled Queens when I grew up. Like sharks that migrate freely, I traveled to survive, didn't want to reach the end of my line in the same place I started out from, though I ended up just on the other side of the river. When someone on the number 1 had a heart attack and died, his corpse rode the loop from South Ferry to the Bronx and back to South Ferry twice. Like a man in his habitat, he seemed to be napping. Unlike the shark, no one put a Metro card under his fin, cigarette in his jaws, can of Red Bull by his side for the journey. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you. I love the conversational tone of your poetry and how you ground it all in like concrete settings and research. That was great. Next up is going to be Lynn McGee. Let me introduce her. Lynn McGee is the author of the poetry collections Tracks and Sober Cooking, as well as 2 award-winning poetry chapbooks, Heirloom Bulldog and Bonanza, a 2020 quarterfinalist of the Codhill Press Manuscript Prize, 2019 Pushcart nominee, and 2017 Best of the Net nominee. Lynn's poems are forthcoming in the Atlanta Review, Atticus Review, Tampa Review, Saranac Review, and Across the Waves. And her children's book, Starting Over in Sunset Park, co-written with José Pelauz and illustrated by Bianca Diaz, is forthcoming in fall 2021 from Tilbury House Publishers. Her audio collaboration with composer Bill Parod appeared recently in the Atticus Review, and her poems were recently included in Upstreet, What Rough Beast, Lavender Review, 9 Muses Poetry, Stonewall's Legacy, the American Journal of Poetry, Cordella Literary Magazine, the Potomac Review, the American Poetry Review, Southern Poetry Review, and more. She lives in the Bronx, New York. All right, Lynn, take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it so much. Susana, I loved hearing your poems, and I wanted to just say that what I really love, and I've told you this before, but I'll just say it for people who don't know you, that you write about the experience of women in a way that I think is so important and so rare, and I really treasure it, and I'm really glad it's out there. So I'm going to start with a poem from this little chapbook. Just hold up for a second. It's like this cute little chapbook. I won the Bright Hill Press contest, chapbook contest, anyway, and it's called White Blaze, and it's I think there are 3 million pigs, hogs in factory farms, and they escape once in a while, and they meet up with wild hogs. So White blaze. A blade of fur along his spine means this boar's forebears were herded onto wooden ships, and the white blaze on his face means his mother escaped a factory farm or made a run for it when some truck spun on ice and slammed to its side, sows frozen to the trailer's metal ribs, shrieks fading as she bombed through the Oklahoma scrub where he was born and raised, upper tusks like whetstones, stropping lower tusks into swords that impale dogs when he's cornered, send their limp bodies flying. Sun high, he wallows in the greasy bank of a cow pond, sets out snuffling for snails and savors corn seething in its husks. Salamanders are sweet packets of blood, and a fawn carcass steams as he rifles to the bone. Trap smart, he shuns piles of kibble and tunnels beneath the crackle of electric fences. A million of his kind, his mother's side, are dropped twisted in the boiling vat, or wag their heads in madness, piglets nursing through the bars. His father's progeny gouging pits into golf courses, grinding against foam poles, creosote staining the calloused shield of their shoulders, hard drums of their sides, world gutted wide. I also have poems in that book about invasive species that I find their story very moving. You know, they're very tenacious. They're kidnapped from their continent and brought to ours. Okay, so I'm going to move on to this book, Sober Cooking. A lot of these poems are about the experience of being banned from my lover's hospital room when she was hospitalized with strokes and heart failure, and you know, writing this kind of got me through that. So this is Incoming Call. After the hand-scrawled sign, family only, that blocked me from your room, after I paced outside your life, a starving wolf, lair avalanched shut, after winter, then spring, you called me one night, and we spoke screen to small screen. The voice you'd lost and found was slower, but I drank the sound of it and asked you to angle the phone so I could see your sleeping hand, the arm that would never wake, the outline of long legs that my legs remember, so I could say goodbye in my way to all the parts of you. Okay, and this is it. So I'm watching the time, 8:22, okay. Your sternum, where I rested my head those years we shared a bed, has been cracked like a lobster claw, and a jigsaw in the surgeon's hand flicks its razor tongue. Behold the pericardium, milky veil that guards your fist of a heart, finally loosening its grip. This morning, in a southern state saturated in sunshine and free of helmet laws, a young man was mangled beyond repair, but his strong heart, hunkered down in its cave, was gently pried out like a barnacle, and his gift, in its yellow cushion of fat, was packed in ice, flown north, and rolled with expert haste to the west side of Manhattan, where you sat up in bed dialing the call that buzzed in my backpack. You text me too, this is it. And by nightfall, surgeons stitched the pulsing muscle of a stranger into the cavity of your chest, atrium to atrium, vein to vein, and your blood finds its new hub and passes through. During that same time, my father died, and I wrote this poem for him. He was a pilot. Flight. There are two kinds of people, those afraid of heights and those who imagine jumping. I know which type I am. All my life, I watched my father lift off coast and land, a young man in a flight suit rippling with zippers, an old man with white hair sipping coffee in a cockpit, horizon, a blistering red line. Dying now in an oxygen mask, He stands, a small boy, on the edge of a cliff, surveying the vast, confusing light. He fills his lungs. Capillaries pulse like strings of lights. He calculates the speed of his own weight falling and stretches out his arms. I take his hand. We leap. I'm going to read a few poems from tracks. Oh, they have the little picture there. This is my latest book. These poems were all written on the New York City subway. Okay, this is the first one, tracks. A woman settles to my left, another to my right. Their padded torsos warm as the cushioned walls of a slaughterhouse ramp. Rush hour can be comforting that way. Few grown women can sit beside each other on the subway's long orange bench without hips pressing together. Men lean forward for shoulder room. The train stalls, and out of the silence, a tiny percussive riff leaks from earphones. Someone rifles through a bag of chips. Windows show the tunnel's sooty walls, and shapes swirl in that dark palette. I'm standing at the pole and shift my bag to the other shoulder, summon the cheerful voice that had startled me that morning in the half-light between sleeping and waking. The schedules of ghosts are more erratic than trains. Even the living stall in dark places, hurtle toward light. I'm poised to dart when the silver doors glide open. Something holds me on track. Okay. I'm going to read a poem. I write a lot of poems about people that I've lost, and I think of these as love poems. So this is a poem about my sister. It's called Jupiter and Chaparral. When my sister visited New York, we stood waiting on the subway platform, and she seemed out of place, I thought, in her pastel blouse and full skirt. But she was completely at ease, pointing out the mosaic of an eye, its elegant broken gaze. And I like to think of her with that ease, taking in beauty on her last day. Clouds soaked with pink and field electric, silver crackling across its face. Her windows were open, air sweet as her car lumbered off-road, arms limp in her lap, concrete blocks breaking her speed. Then fangs in her temples withdrew. She and I would have marveled at how the body can remember itself long enough to step from a car with shredded tires and be eased down to a quilt spread on gravel by a woman who pulled over to help, there at the corner of Jupiter and Chaparral. Jupiter, god of the sky, Chaparral, brush-covered earth, and our lost girl suspended between them. No weather, no sky, waxy tube, rooted down her throat. The rest of us bowing by the high white bed, praying for her to drift back down and later for her to rise. So I think in a little more time, I'm going to read a poem about, thank you. I'm going to read a poem about my nephew who passed away on December 26th. He was 33 years old. He was autistic. He lived in a living facility. He had a big personality. Okay, differently alert. He doesn't make eye contact. The nurse reports of my nephew who is limp with sedation, lips slack, ventilator wheezing on his behalf, inflating his lungs in a rhythm both amiable and stern. He looks right past me, she says gently. He's probably unaware of his surroundings. We thank her, too polite to point out the monitor's appeal just behind her, neon green zigzagging across its screen. We don't bring to her attention the splendor of syringe pumps stacked in a tower, the elegant tangle of cables, polished elbows of pipe. My nephew, who took the door off the stove before he could walk, who faked seizures to score an ambulance ride and be rolled into that luminous cavern of tools, stares past the nurse at an alluring silver dial, a corrugated blue tube, and is unbothered at being part machine now himself, almost fitting in. I'm just going to read, this is kind of in honor of Susana. I think, she writes about Marilyn Monroe a lot. So this is a poem about Mae West, who died in 1980. She was born in 1893. And as you know, I'm sure, she was a vaudeville star, an actress, a comedian known for her keen sense of marketing, stylized sexual posture, subversion of gender roles, and body double entendres. So she was an amazing woman in her time. She really called the shots. And this is called Adjusting for Light. And you know what? I forgot to look at the clock when I first started. I think this is going to be my last poem. I think if anyone wants to, okay. She was born with it, sashayed from child to siren, skipping ingenue altogether, and branded herself Diamond Lil, platinum curls, opulent cleavage, and trademark butch swagger as she sauntered to center stage, hips rolling like John Wayne entering a saloon, holster low, Hollywood her new frontier. She saved Paramount from bankruptcy, bossed everyone around, loosen up, unbend, you'll feel better. Boardrooms of studio heads parted like the Red Sea to let her pass. Thousands stood in line to watch her shimmy on screen, her evening gown a waterfall of glitter. She wrote her own scripts, released the brake on lust. Men swooned at the well-upholstered curves she wielded with supreme expertise, head high and a hat big as a tire. She held out her hand with treats and men scampered down from the trees. Marriage? Only as a last resort. She fell for an accordion player's pretty face, then a boxer's casual grace, bought the building when her landlord banned her dark-skinned lover. She was lion tamer, elephant driver, belly dancer, Brooklynite, bantering with a bevy of black maids espousing their opinions on men. Drag queens blossomed in the light she shared. Pansy-crazed dancers twirled with pride, decades before its time. They hid in plain sight that society of opinionated women, extravagant men, and May. She elevated fallen women and lined her eyes with coal, Kohl. She perfected the art of lounging in a satin bed jacket, cigarette hanger dangling from her limp wrist in sultry insubordination. The switchboard blew up like a Christmas tree when she trained her beam of pheromones on a ventriloquist dummy, drilling straight through its hollow form to the quaking human that held it. Sensors shrieked like starlings clodding a tree. Bumped her off the marquee to welcome zealous toddler Shirley Temple. She didn't seat her throne so much as move it to Vegas, taking the stage with a pack of muscle men, oiled and beaming as they orbited around her. Flashbulbs sizzled and popped. She hit the clubs, voluptuous, octogenarian, running the show, tech crew trailing with tripods and lights. She makes me examine my uninspired choices. My chest cracks open. You only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough. She shows us how to hold out our cup, make someone else pour, and be in charge of saying when. Her voice is everywhere. I let it in. That's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was very moving, and I feel like you really did a great job of bringing all of your characters off the page for us.
Absolutely. I love your work, Lynn. Your work's fabulous.
Yours too. I mean, I feel like our work is very similar in a lot of ways.
Yes, we have a mutual admiration.
No wonder I like your work. It bites me in mind, you know.
Well, it's interesting that we both seem to read a lot, and a lot of our work seems to be focused on death and mortality. And I was kind of blown away when you said they were really love poems, because I hadn't thought about it that way, but I do think that that's so for me too. I mean, sometimes when I introduce my book, I say, well, there's a lot of violence in it, but there's also a lot of There's a lot of love as a theme running through it. And so I'm thinking particularly about a poem about your sister, Jupiter and Chaparral, one of my favorite poems of yours, by the way. In what way, what made you say that you thought that these were in fact love poems?
Love poems? Because I think, you know, we continue our relationships with people after they die. And just because they're gone, it doesn't mean that, you know, your feelings have stopped for them or that you've stopped processing your relationship with them. And it's just a way to put that love, you know, you have to put it somewhere. There's no place to put it anymore. You know, you can't put it on the person because they're gone. I don't know. Yeah. Hold on, I'm just getting my notes out here.
Okay. And if anybody watching has any questions, feel free to write them and we'll address them in the comments.
You know, okay, there is a lot of death in your poems, Susana, too. And I mean, dead shark on the end train, but you know what I thought of, and this is off the cuff because I hadn't planned to think about this. I heard a line in your poem, one of your poems that I'd never heard before, even though I may have heard it before. You said, "I am not a nice person." Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that poem and why you're not a nice person?
It's actually a repeat in the poem Death Has Come In, with a line from Eliot. And it's a very personal poem in a way that, for example, the Space Between Missing and Dead, the poem about the tsunami, is not. And yeah, I use biographical material for my poems, but don't always want to say I, but certainly in that poem needed to say I. I'm writing about the death of a friend from childhood who is no longer a close friend, but in the process of her dying of cancer began to depend upon me. And her death affected me profoundly, which surprised me, partly maybe because she was the first one in our age cohort to die of a malady, not because of drugs or going off to war or having a car accident, but actually getting a degenerative disease. And so she's dying, and I'm writing a poem about her dying, but I'm really writing about me and how I don't feel like I'm a good friend in the situation because of everything that I felt. It's very different from the tsunami poem, for example, in which I'm writing about a husband who keeps searching for a wife who he can't find. It was not uncommon for people after the tsunami to not be able to find their spouses. And I remember reading an article about husbands who, for years after the tsunami, would go looking for the bodies of the women that they loved and never finding them. So that had a universal resonance for me, but the poem in which I say I am not a nice person had a very personal resonance for me. So in one, I have to imagine what someone is thinking. In the other, I knew very well what I was thinking.
Yeah, and you know, I can also see, like, whenever a woman says I am not a nice person, it's code, and a lot of times it means I'm not living up to the expectations being put upon me by a sexist culture. And in your case, it sounds like you were put in the position of being a caregiver, which is often where women are put. And I don't know if maybe that just was a little bit of a reflex to that, unconsciously even.
Yes, I'm not a good, I suppose I could have said I am not a good caretaker, but that's not what I said.
Well, you know, I think a lot of women can relate to that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I've gotten some feedback on that poem and that statement in that poem from women.
Yeah, of course. I think a lot of women can relate to that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when you're writing, you're also writing about loss, and you're writing more about family loss, the loss of your lover, who is your family, the loss of your father, the loss of your sister. And you introduced one of the poems by alluding to, but not really talking that much about, the way you felt excluded from access to your lover while she was in the hospital. Do you want to talk a little about?
I mean, I think this is, this is why we have to have gay marriage, and this was obviously before that. But I think this happens to a lot of people. I know I'm not the only one. It fills you with shame, and you hide it, I think, when it happens sometimes. But, her mother and her sister, for what reasons I was never quite understood. Her mother was always extremely hostile to me. And when she went into the hospital with heart failure, I went to visit her one evening after work. And she had also had 2 strokes, so she couldn't move. There was a big hand-scrawled sign on the door that said family only, and a nurse rushed over, and 2 nurses kind of guided me like sheepdogs to the elevator. And, she had a document she had put in her file that she had signed that said who I was and that I was to have access to all information and visit. But her sister broke up with me on her behalf by holding the laptop to her face and saying, "Does this sound okay?" And she couldn't even move her arms. And she said she apologized so much for all of this later. She apologized, and we we tried to get back together, and then I said, if we're going to get back, you have to marry me. I'm not going through that again. And it's legal now. And so, she wanted to, but then we broke up again. And that time we broke up like grown-ups, just like grown-ups do, not because we were pulled apart by our parents. But, and that's what Sober Cooking was really about. That's what that book was really about. At the same time, my father died. So I was very kind of deep in loss and sadness at that time. But now I forgot what your question was, Susana.
I know. I think you answered it, so it doesn't matter.
Okay. So, Susana, okay, Dead Shark on the N Train. That poem is so poignant and so sad, and it's so much about humanity and compassion and how easily we can be careless with the safety and just forget our humanity when the subway is a place where that can happen, because you're just herded in, you're smashed together like cattle, and it's very undignified. And there's a very, the shark, to me, the dead shark, and the guy who had died, who was actually on the train for how long before they realized he had died?
Well, going up and back would be hours. A couple of times would be hours. Most of a day, at least half a day, I'd say. There's a lot about gender in the book, but it's not all about gender violence. There's some poems about the misuse of animals, as in the Dead Shark poem. I mean, that starts with an animal, but it ends with a human being who's also, in a way, objectified by being, made an object rather than a human being. And there's another poem in the book about the man from Haiti, about a man who is not seen for his humanity, but seen as a stereotypical figure for entertainment purposes, as the shark is.
I feel like you talk about gender roles a lot in your work, especially in the poems about teenage girls, younger women. The dioramas, the poems about the crime scene dioramas are obviously, they're very blue and pink. The violence is very gendered,
Yes. A lot of the victims in the center part of the book, in the dollhouses, were not all, but most were women. And yes, one of the poems says this is a gendered household, blue and pink, blue and pink. One of the ones I didn't read. It's certainly woven throughout the book. I teach, as you know, I teach gender. I've always been interested in the intersection of gender and violence. So although there are poems about love in this book more explicitly, and although using what you said about some of the poems about death and loss being love poems, maybe more about love in this book than I had thought about before. In this, certainly in the central part, there are a lot, and in the other parts as well, there are a lot of dead bodies. Yes. Frances Glessner Lee is a very intriguing person to me. She was very bright. She was not sent, like women of her time, she was not sent to college, but her brother was. Her brother got sent to Harvard. She was expected to stay home and knit and sew. And through a friend of her brother's at Harvard Medical School, she became interested in forensics, not something that was considered an appropriate interest, I suppose. And through that, she began to build these crime scenes. So she ended up teaching at Harvard, training forensic investigators, which is not the trajectory that one would have expected, considering her time and place.
Yeah, and she used, making a diorama, which I could see being an approved occupation for a woman at that time. It's a little crafty, it's a little artistic, it's diminutized, obviously it's miniaturized, which makes it feel safe. But she just really was determined to use whatever tools were available to her. You got to admire that kind of spirit.
She used what she had and she ran with it, so to speak.
I'm just going to turn on my lamp. Sorry. Okay.
But I'm thinking about gender in your book, your books too, Lynn. I'm thinking the poem in Tracks, A Woman's Long Commute, in which you write as a femme lesbian attracted to, generally I know from my friendship with you, you're attracted
from the pictures on my phone.
You're generally attracted to more masculine looking women, but in the commute that you're writing about in Women's Long Commute, you're looking at and identifying with a trans woman who is commuting on the subway, who, like you, is tired and, crowded in with everyone. So you want to talk about that?
Well, I mean, it's one of those moments where you realize that gender is performative. It does kind of transcend. I mean, we had this vibe. I mean, I just looked at her and it was like we were two exhausted women going home from work on the train. And, she took some lotion out of her purse. It smelled really nice. I was thinking, oh, I wish I had lotion like that. I was just noticing her shoes, her, everything that she did to make herself look lovely, even though she probably had a hectic day at work. I could just tell from, you can tell when people work in an office and, and I know what kind of brain drain that can be. So, it was just a moment of, I don't know if solidarity is, too big a word, and that anyone would deny that woman her being a woman, it just appalls me. It's just like another friend. I mean, this is another just intuitive thing. I think I'm probably going to get someone's going to have to school me on the theory, all the theoretical stuff. But when my friend transitioned from female to male, and this was a long time ago, this was when it was, we didn't know as much as we know now, but it was 15 years ago. I didn't take it that seriously. And then one day we were in a bathroom together and I realized I didn't want to pee in the same bathroom as her. I had this reaction, I felt more, I needed more privacy. And and then I realized that she was different. It's she's a man. I don't like mixed. Oh God, now I'm really gonna get the hate mail. I don't like mixed bathrooms. I like all women bathrooms for me. So women identified, you know. But it's a quiet poem. That's a Women's Long Commute is a very quiet poem. And the commute is, of course, you know, kind of a metaphor for the trajectory, you know, the like never ending, sometimes repetitive, necessary trajectory of gender, you know, compliance, resistance, performance, negotiation, you know, that you go through your whole life as a woman in a sexist culture. So that's all.
So we're talking about love, and we're talking about death, and we're talking about violence. So we probably have to talk about sex and eroticism too as the final topic, right?
Yeah. Well, so, you know, full disclosure, I mean, Susana and I are pressmates twice with the Slapering Hol Press manuscript contest. We both, from Hudson Valley Writers Center, we both won that wonderful chapbook contest. And we both had a book with Broadstone Books. Susana's both our new books are from Broadstone Books, when they make beautiful books, and that was so exciting. So our collections are very different.
Well, let me ask you about your poem, Scar. It's a very erotic poem, okay? And I say that as a hetero woman about a poem I know to be about a female partner. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem to make a difference. So should it make a difference?
No, I mean, it shouldn't. I mean, I hope that, it's funny, it's like, I'm not really like known as a lesbian poet, and I don't like, I've always like feel like I'm tapping on the door to the magical lesbian land of like lesbian writers, and I never like get in, you know. But that poem is about me, you know, having a lover who has a mastectomy, who has a scar on her breast, and it's a very erotic poem, and it's a poem about the exchange of power, and I think that because of it's about the dynamic and not about the physiology, people can relate to the dynamic. Other women, even men, you know, can probably relate maybe, you know, to the dynamic of the poem, and the things that are universal, I guess, or the things that don't have to be centered on your sexual, you know, or makeup or whatever.
I'm just comparing it to Radiance, which I read earlier about the breast, in which the poem is entirely centered on the breast. And,
right.
Yeah.
God, we should do a breast series. That's right. I think, have I heard that poem before, or is that a new poem?
No, it was in that, remember that anthology about breasts and bras?
Yeah,
it was in that originally.
I gotta get that. Okay, just hold on here. Sorry, there's something else I wanted to ask you, Susana. Okay, pop culture. We got to talk about pop culture.
Oh yeah,
because you know, that's really the only thing I am a student of. I mean, you know, I'm not like that is my area of scholarly interest. Informally, it's your area of scholarly interest formally. So,
yeah, I mean, look, Marilyn, as you know, is in this book. Otis Redding is in the book. Mm-hmm. But then there are people like Maria Callas who are in the book. Is she pop? I wouldn't call her pop culture. So, but yeah, figures end up in the book. I'm thinking of your new manuscript, the TV in the Other Room, which has a lot of pop culture in it, definitely. A lot of ekphrastic work, to use that word, poems based on art or some kind of art, including a TV show is a type of art, and work in response to The Americans or Orange is the New Black.
Mm-hmm. Well, they all reflect, you know, they're a mirror, you know, and they're not, they reflect a little piece of the culture. And it's kind of fascinating to me. They also, they freeze it in time too, like you can, and now we have access to any decade. And, to me, the themes, there's like gender roles, heroism, homesickness, homophobia, the impact of sexism on women's medical care, coming of age, and, of course, sexuality, and gender expression. Those things are all, flowing through all the streaming series and movies and TV shows that we watch, and we're getting all these. They're reflecting reflecting us, and also in a way they're trying to figure out who we are, like what's trying to get us to respond, like we have to engage, and people only engage in things when they feel a common thread, or they recognize themselves, or it touches on an issue that they care about. So it's revealing, I think they're revealing, and that's what kind of fascinates me. And then I took all these poems from another manuscript that are all kind of like love poems, relationships, breakups, all that stuff, and put them in with the TV, the TV in the other room. And oddly enough, they like fit in. So it's just basically, I guess, life is totally a fiction, so they fit together so easily and so well, but you always did. I mean, I'm going to hold up one of your books, Susana, this is, I think, can you see it?
Well, I knew you were going to hold up that one.
That one,
Elvis
okay.
Presley's hips and Mick Jagger's legs.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this is what I find so interesting. I mean, we met through Slapering Hol Press from winning the contest in different years. And your first collection, Bonanza, was inspired by the TV show, even though it's not, only about the TV show. And my first collection was the Scottish Cafe, was inspired by a group, yes, thank you, of mathematicians in what was then Poland, right before the Holocaust, trying to hold their lives together. So that they seem like very disparate things thematically, but then, and we were both mentored by Slapering Hol Press people, which was life-changing, because I think, that's how we learned, or at least that's how I learned how to be a poet, because I didn't have a clue. But there's much more convergence now, because we're both interested in gender. I think we're both interested in violence. We both use elements of pop culture. And even in the most recent books, there are, I mean, yours is much more centered around the subway, even though it's not about the subway, but the subway is a unifying theme throughout. The subway only really appears in my book in the shark poem, but New York as a city appears throughout the book in various poems. So so the convergences are interesting.
Yeah, and we both write narrative poetry.
Yes,
very image centric, with an emotional subtext that's kind of restrained. It's like expressed through the images, and I see that, although you do you do a lot of short line, more shorter line sculpted type poems, and mine are just getting more and more like the pandemic haircut. They're just like they're like, or in need of one. They're like, my line lengths are getting outrageous, but
so why do you think it is? Because I don't think you can blame that on the pandemic.
I think it has to do with the breadth. I think I've kind of gone back to the 4-beat line. I think I've kind of gone back to the ballad. I think I don't know if it's because of my heritage, but I love a good ballad. Okay. No, I don't know why I said that. I've never said that in my life. But no, I think that's something about and I think I want to take a lot of space, I want to exert my right to take space. And I want to, I don't want to be restrained, and I don't want to, except by my writing group that like kicks my ass, at least, and I have to, they help me edit a lot. But no, I think that's part of it. I think part of it is tone, and part of it is the meter.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's about time to wrap up. But before we go, if either of you have any book recommendations or things that you're reading now that you want to recommend to our audience, feel free.
I sent a bunch of links.
Yeah, I did. Did you get the links?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about maybe
You could just paste them into the chat.
Okay, well, we can do that.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll wrap up for the night, but thank you guys both for joining us so much. And next week, we're going to have Dan Albergati and Charlotte Pence, so we'll see everybody again then. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone who's there. Thank you. Wait, I want to take a screenshot of that. Oh, can I take a screenshot of the one where it said adult content? Oh yeah, that one. Wait, I have to get something that says, hold on, screenshot.
I'm going to do that.
I took screenshots, Susana, there.
Oh, you
I
did?
just really wanted something that said may contain adult themes. When I saw that, I was like, that did it say adult content or adult theme? Themes, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Yes, thank you, Nicole. This was a lot of fun. You should have interrupted us maybe, because we would have just kept going.
I was enjoying it. It was good.
And thanks to Kim also.
Yeah, the owner of the bookstore. Read It Again.
Yeah, and Read It Again Books.
Thank you.
Yes, great name. Love it. Read It Again Bookstore.
Yeah, very cute.